So we've got about a quarter of the people that signed up for this, but here we are. And Laryssa from Hawaii is our guest speaker. We'll hear about what comb honey and what it's like to keep bees all year round. I know that's something different than what we do here, and I personally enjoy the break, but there's a lot of anxiety in the winter waiting to come out to see if the bees are still alive, see if we did things right in the fall, and see what happens in the spring to see if we've got to make up for stuff, or if we get a good year or a bad year or what. But that doesn't happen there. So I'll let you go ahead. Do you have a PowerPoint or something?
I do, yeah.
All right. I'll see if I could figure out how to turn on sharing for you.
I think it's on. Yep. Can you see it?
Perfect. Look at that.
Oh, okay. So aloha, everybody.
Aloha.
So I'm a beekeeper here on the Big Island. I have a bee farm here called Bee Happy Hawaii, where we primarily sell comb honey to chefs and resorts. And for those of you who like podcasts, I also host a podcast called The Buzz About Bees that I hope you check out after this. And we also have an educational website about beekeeping called Beekeeping Made Simple. So I was first going to talk about beekeeping in Hawaii, and then I'll get into the comb honey. I started keeping bees in Philly. That's where I grew up. That's where my family's from. And then it really went horribly. I don't know how many people in your club talk about how badly beekeeping can go your first few years. I'll stop the sharing for a minute while I'm talking about how I got into beekeeping. But my first few years went pretty badly. I tried without some top bars. I was in Philly. I joined the bee club there. But I lost my first 3 hives, my first 2 years. And I was going to give up because I felt awful. And they all died over the winter. Like you said, it's, really that time that the beekeepers tested, like the ultimate test to see how the bees will do. So I was going to give up, but then I took a vacation in Hawaii and learned about a bee farm that had an internship. So being 29 and working as a freelancer, that's what I did. Is I moved to Hawaii for an internship and ended up staying here. I worked for a small farm here that had 130 hives, and it was maybe a good, but didn't seem like a very good timing when it happened. It was when the small hive beetle arrived in Hawaii. So the farm I was supposed to go work for had 130 hives when they supposedly wrote the ad for looking for a beekeeper, and by the time I got there, they had 2 left. The farm I went to work for after that went from 4,000 hives to 800 very quickly. The small hive beetle kind of like destroyed the population here in Hawaii. And so I'll go back to the presentation here. Here in Hawaii, it's interesting to be a year-round beekeeper because it's just very unique. It's a little bit different than other places that don't have a frost because we're so isolated. We didn't get the varroa mite until about like 15 years ago, whereas I believe the US got it in the 80s, the early 80s. But then when it did come here, we had a lot of issues with getting varroa mite treatments over. We have 10 of the 14 climate zones in the world are here on the Big Island in particular. And we are limited by genetics because of the lack of, since we can't ship bees in. But one of the big benefits of beekeeping here on this island is, here on the Big Island is where the active volcano is, Kilauea. And so we have thousands of acres of lava, which isn't great for almost anything. You know, it's not really the ideal place to live, though there are people who live in the lava fields. There's not much that grows in the lava fields, but the ohia tree does, and that produces a flower that makes a decent amount of nectar. And that honey is certified organic by the USDA because there's nothing else out there. There's no spraying. You don't have to own this land. There's just nothing but this tree that can survive out in the lava fields. So the farm I ended up working for after my internship, I was there for 7 years. They're one of the few USDA certified organic honey farms in the country. And we do get, they do get testing by the USDA randomly to make sure that their honey does not have, you know, high amounts of pesticides or other chemicals inside their honey. So I know that is something that some people are curious about, the organic honey. So like I mentioned, without a frost, the downside is that you have an enormous amount of pests. This varroa mite and the small hive beetle are the two real big ones. And although our hives won't perish over winter because of cold, you will have hives that will just abscond, and then you know, they can't bounce back because they're so small from their varroa mite infestation. But most of the time what happens is hives with really high varroa mites will get taken over by small hive beetles, because small hive beetles are an opportunistic pest, and they will just decimate within a week or so a hive that's weak from the varroa mite. And you know, there are some other difficulties with Hawaii, like you can't have formic acid shipped to you, or mold release, or really anything aerosol or acid, because it can't get flown over here. So you could potentially have something sent by cargo ship that could take anywhere from 3 weeks to 3 months, is usually what they tell me. And then of course, Kauai is, well, maybe not so well known in the mainland, but Kauai is where Monsanto, Bayer, Syngenta, a lot of those chemical companies do their testing. And so that is a common problem, especially on windy days, for farmers and beekeepers and people that live nearby, with difficulty with the spraying. They supposedly own more land than anyone else on the island. And they have some very large farms out there. So this is a photo of the coffee trees. The coffee trees here, I'm in Kona, so we're known for our Kona coffee. And the coffee trees produce nectar, and we have a decent amount of nectar flows, but we don't have honey flows year round. We have a lot of dearth, a lot of robbing, not as much on the wet side, but I'm here on the dry side. And so, you know, like these coffee flowers, they call it the Kona snow because you'll get a big rain. The coffee trees will bloom for 36 hours and then the blossoms die. And so the bees go crazy for 36 hours, and then there's not much for them after that. They also get a nectar buzz. They say there's caffeine in the nectar, so they get a little bit of a caffeine buzz briefly for a day and a half, and then it's gone. I'm not sure how many people know this, but Kona is the home to some of the world's largest queen breeders. And that's because of the mild climate, specifically here in Kona. It's very low wind, moderate climate, so it's not even like really hot. You know, you don't get the heat like in the Arizona desert. It's never really too rainy. And so it's really great for queen breeding. Kona Queens, Big Island Queens, which is now owned by the Oliveras company based out of California. They're both here in Kona. So what I read from the county website is they estimate there's about between $8 and $13 million worth of queen bees exported out of Hawaii in 2018. But there's quite a bit of queen breeders that are smaller that have been popping up. A lot of them are people that work for the big queen breeders and then start their own operation. It's actually, I'd say, the biggest issue I have as a beekeeper here is finding somewhere to put my bees where the bees bring in enough food. A lot of these queen breeders, I mean, they're commercial apiaries. And so, you know, at any time there could be a yard of 50 to 100 bees put within a couple miles of my hives. And that means a crazy amount of varroa mites, small hive beetle population just exploding during robbing season. That could mean me having to treat again a couple months later because of all of these things that are now in the immediate area near my bees. But you know, there's a lot of good things about beekeeping in Hawaii, like no frost. This is a photo from Mauna Kea. That's with my husband when we were up there on Christmas Day. So there's frost up there, but it's also high up in elevation. It's about 13,000 feet. I have seen bees at the visitor center on Mauna Kea, which is 9,000 feet, but I haven't seen honeybees up any higher than that because I don't think there's enough flowers that survive up there. But, you know, we don't have a winter, so we don't have to go by a strict schedule. We still have hives collapsing, mostly from the varroa mites and small hive beetle, but we don't have to treat, you know, like we don't have that schedule of having to treat while the bees are, you know, the winter bees are in the hive, and we don't have to treat before you close it up for the winter. And really the thing you have to worry about is treating before the big honey comes in, so you don't have to worry about an infestation coming when all of your honey is on the hive. And then we don't have bears, raccoons, skunks, possums. We don't have rabies actually either. I have never heard of someone's losing a hive due to wasps here. I mean, you can split anytime, you can requeen anytime. And then one fun part about beekeeping in Hawaii is that there's 10 different climate zones on this island. So I have a yard of bees. I'll go back to my face for a minute. I have a yard of bees on a property that is an oceanfront property, not mine, just somebody lets me put bees there. And so that's considered a semi-arid desert. And that's where we harvest the Kiave honey. And then it's a 30-minute drive up the mountain to a very tropical, moist area where it's super wet. And that's where we'll harvest the avocado and the Brazilian pepper tree and from the ohia tree and some of these wetter climates. So that's a really great part about beekeeping in Hawaii, is that there's just so much variety in such a small place. The organic farm I worked for, they moved their bees 3 times a year and just traveled around the island in like a big circle. Chasing the blooming flowers. And so they were able to bring in quite a bit of honey if you are willing to chase the blooming flowers and to move your bees around like that. So that's beekeeping in Hawaii. It's, you know, it is exhausting. There's usually like a point every year where I consider selling all of my bees and just taking a break, because I'm just tired and I just want a break. But I have taken up to like 3 months off, like when I had my baby and when I got married. I went back to Philly for that, and there's enough of like a lull in the winter time where the bees are active but the hives are small, and the robbing has calmed down, and you can kind of take off from them for a month or 2 at a time and not bother with them too much, and they're usually okay with it. So what I primarily do is comb honey, and for those of you that don't know what comb honey is, that's honey that you're harvesting straight out of the comb. It's, in my opinion, like the easiest way to harvest honey. It's altered by humans like very little, if at all, depending on how you're doing it. And it's 100% edible. Some people, you know, wonder if you can eat the wax, and the wax is edible too. So the reasons why I harvest comb honey is because it does offer health benefits from the hive. I mean, there's not a ton of research behind it, but you are consuming the beeswax and more pollen and propolis than you would if you were having just the liquid honey. As a consumer, you know that the honey wasn't heated up to the extent that your honey's not raw, and it wasn't strained, obviously, because it's still in the comb. It requires, the way I do it, it requires the least amount of equipment of all the ways to harvest honey, and it can sell at a premium price. When I was working for that bee farm, they were organic and they had 4,000 hives, and they had just 7 employees, but still employees, and a warehouse and a huge extractor and forklifts and trucks. And as a beekeeper, you don't make much money. I'm sure that's not really a surprise to any of you guys. And so if you were to start your own bee farm, I saw what they were doing, and I knew that I just never wanted to have all of that responsibility and all of that equipment and employees. And so that's when I started to think about doing comb honey, because it does sell at a higher cost and you can have fewer hives, but potentially make the same amount as somebody with almost twice as many hives as you. And this photo is a photo I recently got from a woman. She's a client of mine. Her Instagram is Hawaii Picnics and Provisions. It's right there at the bottom of the slide. And she buys the comb honey from me and puts it on platters with fruit and cheese and stuff, and does that catering for fancy luncheons and breakfasts and stuff. So before I get into how to harvest comb honey, in case you're wondering what you do with it, this is a photo of a frame of my honeycomb at the Halekulani, which is a resort in Waikiki. They bought one of those stands, and they would have that on display at their brunch. And I've sold it to some private people as well, just for their parties. And I know of some beekeepers who have done this at their own home for parties that they have, once COVID and everyone's fear of germs and stuff is all of that is over. Is things that we can look forward to doing again. But other than that, comb honey lets you turn honey into something that's not liquid anymore. So instead of being limited to drizzling it on things, you can cut it up into chunks and sprinkle it on waffles and pancakes and salads. I had a restaurant want to buy comb honey so that they could have it at their ice cream bar. It is a really nice thing to add to brunch platters with cheese and fruit. And if you've never done this before, I highly recommend this, maybe for Thanksgiving or the next time you have people over for dinner. People are super impressed by this, and it's incredibly easy. If you just buy a wheel of brie, kind of like in this photo here, you just buy a thing of brie and put a piece of honeycomb on top, and then put it in the oven once the oven's not on anymore, but just still kind of hot from you cooking something else, and put it in there for 5 minutes. Take it out and sprinkle some walnuts or something on it, and it's delicious and people love it, and it's a super easy appetizer that I like to have at when we do Thanksgiving. Okay, so I started doing comb honey because I didn't want to buy an extractor. I was living in a studio apartment, and my boss at the bee farm said that she was always getting requests for comb honey, but they didn't want to do it. So I knew I'd have a client for it. And I already don't use foundation in my frames. So it was an easier jump for me. If people have questions about going foundationless, feel free to ask me them afterwards. I didn't want to get too much into what that means to be foundationless in your frames. But since you guys don't have to deal with those extreme hot summers, you know, like over 100 degrees for days at a time. I mean, unless the summers are changing more than I remember from when I was in Pennsylvania. It might be a little bit more feasible for you guys than some of the southern states. But so when you set up your hive, there's two main problems that people come across with their comb honey. And that is that they want to prevent cross comb, which is honeycomb going from one frame onto the frame next to it, or that the bees just don't make anything and they end up with empty frames and nothing going on. So first you want to set up the frame. You don't want to use foundation, and you want to put a starter strip in, just like in the photo here. The strip is just going to dip down like about an inch or so. And I recommend making that strip out of beeswax foundation. Then it's super easy to cut and to squish in there so that it stays up at the top of the frame. But you can also use a strip of wood or plastic foundation that you cut and have it stuck up in the frame by drizzling a little bit of melted beeswax in there to keep it put and to, you know, attract the bees to it. And alternatives to this is you can buy the raw surrounds, which are the containers with the frame that you put in there, and super easy, just a little bit more expensive to do. Some people put wire in their frames instead, and that's an alternative. It's really limiting though to the shape and the size of the comb. So it's something that I prefer not to do, but is an option if you're really concerned about your comb breaking. So once you have your little starter strip of foundation in your frames, then you want to make sure your hive is level. And this is incredibly important. Your hive has to be level. It can face forward if you have problems with a little bit of leaking inside your hive and you don't want there to be flooding on your bottom board. But other, you know, just a few degrees is fine to prevent that. And the rest, the hive should be level. You want to obey the bee space. So if you have a 10 frame box, put 10 frames in, 8 frame box, 8 frames in. You don't want to space them out because the bee space is like the #1 cause of the cross comb. And then really keep in mind to not use a lot of smoke, because beeswax is super porous and it will, your honeycomb will taste smoky. And that's it. You put these frames in your super, and I recommend doing it earlier in your honey season, not towards the end. That's what a lot of people, when they don't have the bees taking to the frames, is because they chose to do this, you know, like maybe August or something, and it's a little bit too late in the year. If you're concerned that you're not going to have enough honey for the winter, I mean, you don't have to do an entire box of this. It could just be like 2 frames in your super, has no foundation in it. And that could potentially be for comb honey harvesting. It doesn't have to be an entire super or all or nothing. And so when you're ready to harvest, you're going to harvest just like you would any other frame. You want to harvest it once the cells are mostly capped. I mean, a lot of the times I'll see a frame like the one in this photo where it doesn't completely go to the edge, and that's totally fine as well. Since you're not using a lot of smoke, I just shake the frame to get most of the bees off, and we have a lot of wild turkeys here, so I use a turkey feather to get the bees off the frame. And however you get bees off your frame, just again, make sure you're not heavily smoking that box and your frames to get the bees off. And if you're not looking to sell your comb honey, this isn't something you have to worry too much about, but just to keep in mind, the longer the frame of honeycomb is in your hive, the darker it'll get. Some, you know, depending on the time of year, it might get stained by the pollen that's yellow or orange. It might get brown from propolis. And the darker the comb gets, the less appetizing I think the comb honey is. It gets a lot chewier and isn't as enjoyable as, you know, the honeycomb that was harvested fairly soon out of the hive. So I wouldn't leave it in the hive too long. You can wait till the end of the summer to pull it all out. Or you can also pull it out one by one as you see them and just store them in your freezer until you're ready to harvest all of them. So when you're, but before you package, you want to make sure you know what you're going to put them in. And these are the different ways that I store my comb honey and package it. I have the jar with the liquid honey inside. If you do it this way, don't get jars that are too narrow or you're not going to fit much in there. I have a client that, you know, I fill their jars for them and then they put their label on top. And the jars, I would say, is more of the advanced comb honey harvesting, if there is an advanced way to do it. And that's just because honey crystallizes really fast when there's comb in it, or even just little pieces of beeswax. And so if you're going to put in a jar with liquid honey, it's going to crystallize pretty fast unless you have honey that doesn't crystallize very quickly. You can delay the crystallization by putting it in the freezer, but that will only delay it a few months. It will still crystallize eventually. And here at my place, we took an old fridge that was broken, put a light bulb in it and a thermostat, and we made like a hot box for our honey that's set to 100 degrees. So that's what we do with our honey if it crystallizes before it's sold. But you know, for most people, it's just, it can be a little tricky. So it's a little bit of a harder way to harvest comb honey. The other ways that I recommend are, we have the hard plastic cases. The beekeeping supply companies sell them in 8-ounce and 16 ounces. They are fine to keep on your kitchen counter without having, you know, any kind of better seal on them. But if you're going to sell them, then you should be shrink wrapping them or putting some kind of sticker around it. And they can be kind of pricey though. And then you have your clamshells, which holds 12 ounces, and those are super cheap. I think I bought a case of 500 for very little. The only thing is that these do not seal. So if you want to store it in any way in your house or give it to somebody, you have to shrink wrap it. And even then, I had a customer have an issue with ants eating through the shrink wrap and still getting into the container. Not as much of a problem, like probably where you are, but here where there are insects everywhere can be a little bit more difficult. So those are the 3 ways that I harvest, that I store my comb honey. You can just put it in Tupperware. When I was first getting started, I didn't know what was going to sell best. So I bought one of those big pieces of big Tupperware containers. It was like 10 inches long and 5 inches deep. You put a layer of wax paper, you put your comb honey down on it, you put another layer of wax paper, more comb honey pieces down on it, and you can put that in the freezer, and that will stay in there, and it'll be perfectly fine until you're ready to pull it out. One second. So when you want to harvest, you need to first freeze your comb, or you need to freeze it after you're done putting it in the container. That's really the most important thing. I mean, if you're going to eat it like right then and there, it's fine. But if you're going to be storing it for a few days or longer, there could be wax moth in there that are going to destroy your comb honey. So you can either take the entire frame and put it in the freezer, take it out, let it dry off and warm up, and then cut it. Or once it's in your plastic containers or in your jars, freeze it then and take it out. Just don't label it before the freezer, or else when you take it out of the freezer, it's going to be, the labels are going to fall off. Which maybe sounds obvious, but a mistake that I've seen employees and other people make. So when you're cutting up your comb honey, you know, a bread knife usually works. It is sufficient. If you don't want to buy a better knife to cut your comb, you want to make sure you're freezing it, and you can always store it in the freezer if you want to slow down the crystallization. If you're putting it in a container like these here, those hard plastic containers, when you cut it, you know, some honey is going to drip out. So if you don't want your comb sitting in a pool of honey in the container, some people like the look of it, some people don't. It's a little bit, will leak a little bit more if you're going to be maybe shipping it. You can get a tray, a cookie sheet is fine, and a wire rack, and just let your comb sit on that overnight. Here, since we harvest a lot of comb honey, I went to a restaurant supply store and got like really big wire racks and those huge cookie sheets that were too big to even fit inside the oven. And we let our comb sit on that. So if you're a beginner beekeeper and you have maybe just one hive or so, and you're not planning on harvesting much, but you would maybe like to harvest a frame of honey or something this year, then what I would recommend is just taking 1 or 2 frames, popping the foundation out of those frames and putting them in your honey super. You don't have to put a starter strip in if those frames are going to be surrounded by other frames with foundation. And if you have enough honey on your hive, then, you know, take 1 or 2 of those frames and cut it up, and you have comb honey that you can enjoy for the winter until your bees bring in some honey the next year. The whole box doesn't have to be for comb honey or anything. If you want to do it a little bit on a larger scale, what I recommend is getting a chest freezer. A chest freezer, I mean, just as a beekeeper, it's one of the few things I splurged on because I find them incredibly helpful. Maybe more so here in Hawaii because of all the insects than you guys, but storing drawn out comb over the winter before I put it back in the hives come the spring, having a chest freezer is super handy. I will pull frames of honeycomb off of the bees and put the entire super with the frames of comb into the chest freezer, freeze them all, and then take them all out and let them defrost before I cut them up and put them into containers for sale. And then of course, if your freezer breaks, which I've had with some of my freezers break, it's still a seal, which is a great way to store frames. Even you still have to freeze your equipment, but then a broken chest freezer, you can put a frame of frozen honeycomb into a broken chest freezer and it still has that gasket seal and will keep your comb perfectly safe from insects and rodents and everything over the winter or whenever until you're ready to put those frames back into your beehive. And then of course, you know, you can potentially put food in it at some point if it's not full of honey, but that rarely happens here in my household. So, so I have a handout that explains the steps to harvesting comb honey. And that is at beekeepingmadesimple.com. If you just go to the blog, I reposted that post yesterday. So it's the most recent blog article and it just kind of goes through those steps. It's really, I think people assume that harvesting comb honey is going to be harder than it is. That there's something fancy that you have to do to the frames, but it really can just be as simple as putting your frames without foundation into a honey super. Here, what I do is I don't even use starter strips anymore. Since I have a chest freezer, when I put a honey super on my hive, most of the frames are empty, like just a plain empty frame with nothing on them. And then I take 2 or 3 frames with drawn out comb and I put them in that super, spaced out with empty frames in between. And so when you do that on a perfectly level hive, I found that that's like 9 times out of 10 all you need for the bees to build your comb in a perfectly straight line. And I have very little issues with cross comb. And when I do, it's usually because it's on a stand that's starting to fall apart and the stand made the beehive not level anymore. And then that's when the comb starts to get a little wonky. But most of the time, just having a couple frames with comb drawn out in that line you want it to go in is enough to make the bees, make the frames on either side of it also go in a straight line. And so the chest freezer allows me to not harvest all of my frames and store them in there, because with the small hive beetle, our population gets really low over winter, and I can't allow too much honey on my hives when the population's so low. So I'll store it in the chest freezer come springtime when the population gets big again and I'm ready to put honey supers on my beehive. I'll just put a couple of frames of drawn out comb in between the empty frames and throw them on the beehive. And that's enough for me to not have to use starter strips anymore. And you're welcome to email me if you have any questions. Let me see, do I have a slide? I don't. It's my email is info at beekeepingmadesimple.com. You can find it at the website. And I do have a YouTube channel, which is Beekeeping Made Simple, which you can find at YouTube, where I go through some of these less, I feel like talked about topics in beekeeping, you know, like selling your honey, ways to have an income with your beekeeping, and things to make out of your beeswax, comb honey, and things like that. There's more than enough of these beekeeping how-to videos out there, but I feel like I learned the hard way a whole lot of some of these random things. So I wanted to start putting them up on YouTube for you guys to see. Let's see. So here's the YouTube channel, Beekeeping Made Simple. And there's the website where you can find the comb honey download. And I didn't look to see if there are any questions in the comments about any of these things that I mentioned. Oh, I see one person said, can you talk about the hive configuration for comb honey? Is that what, can you maybe explain a little bit more of the hive configuration that you're referring to? I mean, it's pretty simple. Like, it doesn't have to be as complicated as like how the hive is set up. I mean, it can just be a few frames in a box. It can be an entire box. It can be all of your hives. It could be just one hive that maybe is bringing in a lot of honey, and so you are okay with taking some frames and designating them for comb honey to play around with. I really think that comb honey is one of those things that's just a fun thing to play around with, and not something that will make or break depending on what you do or what you don't do. But if there's something in particular about the hive configuration, like the supers or how the frames go in, then let me know.
Well, thank you. That was informative and great. I wanted to show everybody here that I've got some of your honey. It looks kind of clear because the color of my green screen, but that jar is pretty much full.
It's like either you ate that really fast or
it's about halfway down. I was gonna save it and to try it on this meeting for the first time, but I couldn't wait, and it was so good. I've had it for maybe a week or so, and it just sits next to the computer, and I have a little spoonful every now and then. But
yeah, it's like vanilla icing, isn't it? It's ridiculous.
Exactly. It doesn't have, like, some honey has a bitter aftertaste.
Yeah.
And some is just excessively sweet. This is very unique.
I can't use that for the comb honey because it crystallizes so fast. Like I've actually waited too long when I pulled the honey off the hive and it crystallized, just like
In the
sitting
comb.
in the comb. And then I don't even like, what do you do with that? It's still just sitting in a giant Tupperware all smushed up. I'll give it to the bees maybe or something. But yeah, that's the mesquite tree. But they call it kiave here. I don't know if you guys have the mesquite. I think it's a southern, it's in the southern states more so, the mesquite. It's a pretty common tree, but they say it's slightly different here in Hawaii.
All right.
You said you have a freezer with a light bulb in it.
Yeah.
That crystallized honey could go in there and it'll be decrystallized in a couple days.
That's true. The thing is the light bulb burnt out. So at the moment, I've been avoiding replacing the light bulb. It's like a specific kind of light bulb that I have to order. And so that's what I've done in the past is I have to like find a big glass jar and put it in there and liquefy it. I've just been avoiding getting that light bulb. But yeah,
I had the same thing happen to my late season honey here, where it all crystallized. I wanted to comment about those clamshells. You definitely don't want to leave those out where the ants can get to them.
No,
I set them out on my honey stand in front of the house, and I went out there, and there were just dozens of ants in all 4 containers.
Yeah,
so that was kind of wasted.
They're not a good for like sales. I give them to the catering company because she buys them and uses them like within days. Otherwise, you have to like store them in the freezer, I guess, and you have to shrink wrap them, and the shrink wrap isn't always enough.
I think there's also probably a way to shrink wrap them, because I do have the shrink wrap, but it seems like if you shrink wrap it the wrong way, it causes it to open up even more.
Yeah, I think some shrink wrap is also really thin, and then I think it partially has to do with the seal. Someone's showing us his comb honey in is that like a Tupperware or what is that?
This is a box for takeaway food.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I also buy them in boxes of 500.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
that has a nicer seal. I like the hard plastic cases, but they're expensive. The plastic cases. I think I ordered them from Better Bee. And they get pretty pricey. So I mean, we charge $24 for the 16-ounce case of it, just to partially make up for how much the cases are. I have sold them in the deli, the like round deli containers, but then you have to cut it in a circle, which is a lot of wasted comb when you're cutting it in a circle. So the rectangle and square pieces are way better for that. Anyone on here use the Ross rounds? No.
That's my plan this year.
Yeah.
Every year I plan on. I've had them for about 8 years now, so this is going to be the year. You might want to check in with me in the fall.
I've been told they work well. I've just never tried them because they just required me to buy extra equipment. And here in Hawaii, shipping anything is usually doubles the price. There's no beekeeping supply companies here in the state.
Wow. So you mentioned that there's 10 different climate zones.
Yeah.
Now, is there and then you pointed out a few different trees and plants that the bees like to visit. Now, is there a continuous honey flow or nectar flow all year long, or is there a bit of a dearth every now and then?
Yeah, October, November to January. I know that's like nothing, But the farm I worked for, they requeened and split in November because that was like their off season. The macnut trees start blooming come January-ish, mid-January. And so that's usually when the honey will start coming in on the other side of the island. Here in Kona, the dearth is pretty much October to February. Luckily, when I had my baby, he came in January, which I didn't plan, but I guess I should have planned it around the wintertime beekeeping because it made it really easy to not have to check the bees for 3 months. Yeah, and the dearth can get pretty bad. It was really bad this year. I put my bees in a different location. Finding places to put bees is always just such a headache. And they're in a new area a little bit higher up the mountain, and there were just so many dead bees outside the hive when I went there a couple months ago. I've never really experienced it that bad. And some people blame the fog, which is the volcanic gas in the air. It looks like smog, but it's from the volcano, and it pretty much blows straight across the island to Kona, where I am. And we didn't have any fog for 2 years. And it was like the best honey production I've ever seen here. And then all of a sudden it came back. A few months ago, the volcano became active again. And it's maybe a coincidence, but just the trees aren't producing as many flowers as they used to. Kind of.
Now, when we're making comb honey here, what we have to do is time it for the flow. So we set up our hives, we build our hives up so we have a lot of brood going on, and then by the time they emerge and become foraging bees, we try to time the age of the bees so we got a lot of foragers when the flow comes, so that they can build wax and they can collect a lot of honey and they can make that comb honey. Is that something you got a time for there, or maybe if you just want something specific? Or
I don't use foundation, so I guess I'm not really having to time it as much. And I don't use an extractor, since all of my honey sales is pretty much, most of my honey is comb honey. So it doesn't require as much timing. Like there's not as much that I'd be doing different. But yeah, like you don't want to be putting the frames for comb honey in your super at the end of the summer. Or I think that's when a lot of people, they say that it doesn't work for them. And I think that's why, is because the bees aren't going to be building new comb in August, the way that they're going to be in June. Or at least, I had a top bar hive when I kept bees in Pennsylvania. So again, like then you don't really have a choice either. The bees, they have to build comb if they need somewhere to store their honey. But the bees aren't going to be festooning come like September, October, November, December, January. If I was to do splits during those months even, I would have to feed them just to encourage them to build some comb, just so that they could expand.
now, considering you're a remote location with so many beekeepers, is the honey do you sell the majority of it in Hawaii, the Hawaii state, or do you ship a lot out? Like, or is there enough beekeepers there that they do other things like produce queens, that honey is still a easy thing to sell?
No, it's not easy to sell honey. The local stores here have like the biggest honey section you've ever seen. And that's why I did the comb honey, because I was working at Big Island Bees, and she said that she had chefs always asking her for comb honey, and they're still my biggest client. They're my biggest wholesale account. I sell them the comb honey, and they have a beekeeping museum. They do beekeeping tours. You really need to just make money off of the tours when you're in Hawaii. because we're limited in how many stores are even here. You know, we have like 150,000 people on the island, roughly. There's not a lot of grocery stores on this island, so you're really shipping off island most of the time. And I mostly sell to restaurants and the chefs because we have some really expensive restaurants and resorts here on Oahu. On the website, I used to do online sales, and most of my customers online were not in Hawaii. But now I strictly sell to other Hawaii businesses, and they pretty much sell to in the tourism industry. But most of the beekeeping that people do is queen breeding. Like almost all of it is queen breeding. And then like Big Island Bees, they do all honey production, but their honey is certified organic. And so that's kind of what their thing is that gets them, I think, to sell more than a lot of the other honey companies. That, and they also paid this famous illustrator to illustrate a logo for them. So they have a really fancy label. So they sell their honey. I think their 47-ounce jar is like $60 something on their website at the moment.
Wow.
Yeah.
How about well, queen breeding, queen rearing?
Yeah.
That style of beekeeping goes hand in hand with royal jelly production. Does that happen a lot there? Have you tried your hand at that? It seems like the environment would help out with creating a lot of royal jelly.
Well, I think since people are getting like $40 per queen, they just don't even bother with something that they would have to sell. I've never tried it. The farm I worked for, his sister tried to do a business making money off of that, but not in Hawaii. Yeah, I don't know anyone that does royal jelly. I think they don't want to be bothered with the short shelf life. I don't know anyone that sells pollen either here. I also have never heard of anyone selling pollination services. It's like very much queen breeding and a little bit of honey production. I mean, Hawaii is pretty low on honey production in comparison to other states. I think one person told me, what was it, North Dakota? One of the northern states is one of the top honey producing states in this country, which is interesting because people think that in Hawaii you do beekeeping year round, so therefore it must just be perfect for bringing in tons of honey. But it's a very small amount of honey is produced here, harvested here in Hawaii in comparison to other states. So, I mean, one of my theories is that, of course, yeah, there's a lot of queen breeding, and so that's what people are focusing on. But when you don't have a winter to, like, even though it's not ideal to lose a hive over winter, when you don't have a winter kind of getting rid of some of the weaker genetics, it makes me wonder, like I could have a hive just barely hanging on that's like the size of a nuke for a year, doing like not much of anything. And unless they get a varroa mite infestation, they'll probably just be around forever. And so I wonder if having something like a winter to kind of weed out the weaker genetics is sometimes a good thing.
That's an interesting thought there.
But we're also just limited in our genetics. There's no more bees coming in. I've never heard of anyone having Russian bees here in Hawaii. It's unless you start to ship in the semen from drones, which maybe some of the queen breeders are doing. We're very limited in what we have here.
You can ship out bees, but you can't ship them in. So you couldn't even ship in a queen? You couldn't buy a queen from somewhere else?
No. But there was a swarm of bees found in a container that arrived in Honolulu. So, and the varroa mite got here and the small hive beetle got here. So there's, things slipping through the cracks, but you cannot ship in. They're really strict, about shipping stuff out of Hawaii, which is super annoying because everything here in Hawaii is on the mainland, but like I have to go through inspections by the USDA every time I mail a frame of honeycomb to Oahu, which is an island that has every single pest we have here. But I have to get it inspected, and then I have to pack it up in front of the USDA inspector, which you know it's a fragile thing to ship an entire frame of honeycomb and pack it up, seal it up, and then she stamps it, and then she comes with me to the US UPS store that is at the airport, and like stands there and watches me ship it. Which is very inconvenient because she's not always at her office when I make an appointment with her. But I'm very strict. And when this varroa mite got here, people were losing beehives like crazy, and they couldn't ship in the formic acid because apparently the formic acid had aloe vera gel in it, and they weren't allowed to ship in aloe vera, was what my boss was telling me. And so there was just nothing that they could do while they were waiting to have some of these laws changed, and so that they could do something about the varroa mite infestation that they had. So there's some obscure things that don't make a lot of sense here in Hawaii.
I heard you mention the big pesticide companies. I bet you they've got their hand in how things are done, so they can do their testing the way they want to.
Oh, it's very sad. I've even there was they spray the sides of the road at the highway with Roundup, and at the county parks and stuff. And so a bunch of beekeepers came to talk about that, because the main tree that grows on the side of the highway is the Christmas berry, or a lot of people call it the Brazilian pepper tree. And it is probably the #1 food source for bees here on the Big Island. And it's invasive. It grows everywhere. It grows really fast. But the county, just sprays the Roundup to deal with the Brazilian pepper tree, and they're just killing, so many people's bees. Even if they have a no spray sign up, sometimes that happens anyway. So we were trying to get a bill passed to, use alternative methods to deal with this tree other than the Roundup. And there were farmers that came to talk against it, even though it didn't have anything to do with their farmland or anything. We were just talking about county land, but they still came out to talk against this bill. And it really blew my mind how there's people from some of these chemical companies just were in favor of Roundup being sprayed, no matter if it was on their farm or in a park that kids play in, or what. Is really sad to see. And I feel bad for the beekeepers on Kauai that have to deal with some of that stuff over there. There's a lot of political things going on with those companies.
Seems to be the way of the world now. How it seems every time they want to get rid of invasive species over here, it's always the ones that the bees really like. Says this makes great honey. This is great. This is so awesome that this new plant is providing our bees, during what used to be a dearth. It's great. And then all of a sudden we get the word that says, oh, we're going to get rid of that. We're going to bring in something to take care of it, a biologic or some other thing. It's like anytime something comes good, somebody else wants to take it away. Always. But anyway, thanks for coming, and thanks for doing a great presentation and answering questions. I don't know does anybody else have questions, or we can just move on to a regular beekeeper meeting and tell us how things are going in your anticipation for spring here, or wherever you may be listening from.
I just had a quick question. With Corona, it sounds like you have to ship everything, or quite a bit of it. With the travel. How's that affected you in your business?
Oh yeah, it's all of the resorts, chefs, there's no breakfast buffets. There's no, one woman just recently started buying comb from me about a month ago. She hadn't bought from me for over a year because there's no catering she's doing. So that's when I was selling online, and I switched to a Shopify website and got way more serious about selling that and focused more on my beeswax candles. And yeah, it was a huge hit. I also sell to that bee farm, my comb, and since their museum was closed, they were doing really well with online sales as well. So they didn't sell my honey on their website, but I took a picture of it and gave it to them and really just kept on pestering them until they started to sell my honeycomb on their website. And that's been doing really well also. So the online sales really just kind of saved my business and helped out a lot. And then fortunately, when I was pregnant and couldn't give in-person classes, I put my own in-person classes into an online class, did a Kickstarter campaign for that. And those classes went up in January of last year. So good timing for that, because then I was able to sell my beekeeping class online when nobody was able to do in-person classes anyway. So that was a backup plan. And I have a bunch of videos on YouTube about a beekeeping business and things that I've learned and that I did right and wrong. And that was really the big thing I learned when I first came to Hawaii. And I mentioned that they were losing all of their bees and the farm went from 130 to 2 hives pretty quickly. But that farm, the owner, he invented a child's toy and had like this multi-million-dollar toy company, and then retired in Hawaii and found out that the farm he bought was a bee farm and just like became a beekeeper. But he was like a really good businessman. And he told me when I was an intern there, he would always have these jokes like, how does a beekeeper go from $10 million, or how does a beekeeper make $2 million? And I was like, I don't know how. And he would be like, start with $10 million. And, you know, he always had all these jokes about how like beekeepers don't make any money and, you know, stuff. He really freaked me out. I mean, between that and them losing all of their hives so quickly. I also witnessed the coffee borer beetle coming here, which really just destroyed a lot of the coffee trees here in Kona. And so I saw really early on that you can't depend on any one source of income for your business if your business is your only source of income. So once I stopped doing graphic design work, I did a lot of candles, and I was doing my classes in person, and I was doing the comb honey. So once the comb honey wasn't really selling, and in-person classes weren't able to go, I was already doing the online stuff. And that's something I really recommend to people if you're looking to do this on the side, or especially if you're going to depend on it. Don't have one thing that you're depending on, like we see here with the coronavirus. It's just, you can't. I mean, even as a beekeeper, you can't even depend that your hives are always going to make it. So, you know, like I have a backup plan for the beeswax. I know a farm that sells 30-pound blocks. If I need it, I can fulfill a large candle order, whether I have enough wax or not. I know that other farm I can buy the pepper tree honey from because it crystallizes really slow. If I need to fulfill honeycomb, I have 2 chest freezers full of comb honey that I have stored up in case my bigger clients need it. I don't sell online or to smaller clients. I have that stored up for them for when they ask me. It's just, I really try to prepare for the worst case scenario, because you really can't depend that your bees are, I mean, I have my bees in different yards also. So if a yard gets sprayed, which happens with the coffee trees, people spray everything. And if I lose one yard, I'm not going to lose all of my yards because they're pretty far spaced apart, and because you just really can't depend on any of this. But fortunately, I learned that lesson really early on. So the coronavirus, definitely, I took a hit to my comb, honey, and to the wholesale accounts, but the other stuff did better. The online classes did really well because of it. So, but good question and a really good thing to consider when running a beekeeping business.
Do you get a lot of people in your, you have the online classes? Do you get a lot of people from Hawaii signing up, or do you get people from mainland everywhere signing up?
Yeah, I've maybe gotten 2 people from Hawaii sign up in the last year. It's very few people from Hawaii. The people in Hawaii want to come in person to the class. But it's almost all people. It's people from the mainland, a few people from like Australia. And then I worked with a beekeeper in Massachusetts, Maine, and upstate New York for the wintering part. I had all my bases covered because I haven't dealt with winter in a long time. But actually, most of the people that sign up for the class are in their second year beekeeping, or are halfway through their first year. Because this is what I realized in my in-person classes is people don't remember what they were taught, like all of a sudden you're there and they're showing you something and it all makes sense. And then 6 months later or a year later, you're there by yourself and you're like, what did she do? And you're trying to remember it. And so that's when a lot of people sign up for the online classes. And that's what I think the online classes are best for. I don't think they're best for someone that's never been around a live beehive, because you still need that hands-on, and it's great to talk to local beekeepers. But if you need to be reminded about what exactly treating is and all the steps to splitting hives and keeping your bees healthy, that's when I think online classes are a great resource for people.
All right. I just noticed there's questions on Facebook, and one of them is, I wonder if Bill is going to take Facebook questions. So what is when you're decrystallizing your honey, what is the highest temperature you would like to go?
I believe it's 100. It's set to Celsius. So I think it's the highest I'll go is 38, but usually that's only if I'm in an emergency. Usually it's set to 37 Celsius. The box is set to a range. You can't set it to a specific temperature. So I usually have it set for between 34, 35 degrees Celsius to 37, 38 degrees Celsius. You don't like to, it will start to get a little, you won't melt it completely, but when you take it out of the hot box, it'll just be like a little distorted, in shape, and won't look totally normal. But I believe that's 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And a mini fridge works fine. A mini fridge works really well too. My husband's an electrician, so he made it for me, and it's just like a cup of water with the little temperature gauge sits in the water, and then there's a light bulb in it. The mini fridge is a little bit harder because some of your jars will be like right next to the light bulb, since there's not as much room. But a broken mini fridge is also sufficient to decrystallize like a case of honey at a time.
The world of beekeepers, they're the ones that save they're the only ones saving the landfills one mini fridge at a time.
Yeah,
We're
and
the
chest
only ones that
freezers.
use broken refrigerators.
I can't say enough about a broken chest freezer. That thing is the best for storing drawn out comb. I just put my frames in there all winter long, pull them out in the spring. It works really well for me. But
As someone mentioned,
we don't have to.
don't let one pest fly into your house if you have frames at room temperature. So I've had frames go bad. I wonder if that refers to comb frames of just drawn out comb, or if that refers to comb honey.
Probably both. I mean, the wax moth will attack it pretty fast. When I freeze my honeycomb, I put it in the supers. I just leave them in the supers. I put the super in a heavy duty trash bag and then put the supers in the chest freezer. So when I take it out, I have like folding tables set up in a room, and I just leave it still in the trash bag on the folding table. And that's usually enough to leave it. But I have left just a frame sitting out in my house, and while it's defrosting and drying off really, and they've been fine in the house, but it really needs to be frozen first, and then it can sit in your house for like 3 or 4 days, no problem. But yeah, if you're just taking it like off the hive, there's a really good chance that there's a wax moth or small hive beetle that are hanging out somewhere on there, especially in Hawaii. I don't know how bad the small hive beetle is for you guys.
Yeah, they seem to know when the bees aren't occupying a hive. And I've had wax moth in my comb honey, and that was the last time I didn't freeze it. Another question here on Facebook is, what island is the honey forest located? And I wasn't. Did you mention honey forest? Maybe I missed it, or maybe that's something else.
Never heard of a honey forest before.
All right.
I mean, I have no idea. I mean, the big island is the big beekeeping island. Kauai didn't have varroa mice or small hive beetle for a while, but they don't have many beekeepers. They're a pretty big farming island though. And Oahu is not as much honey production. There's one honey farm that I know of, but yeah, if there was a honey forest, I feel like it would be here. Really, if there is a forest that's perfect for a honey, that would probably be a lava field.
Well, that was all the questions there, and all the questions in the chat over here. This is, I guess, for the local people, maybe not. Mid-York Beekeepers having an online Zoom beginner class on April 3rd. Please look out for our website later this week for sign-up form. That's Mid-York Beekeepers. That's just what is that? That's to the east of us here.
And
So
anybody from Hawaii can sign up too.
There you go.
Also, Bill, I'm looking for people to do presentations. So you've done it in the past, so we'll get you this time.
Go ahead. You know where to find me.
I thank you in advance.
So has anybody else got questions or want to just talk about what's going on with their bees or whatever else? Any new ideas or thoughts? What's going on in your shop getting ready for beekeeping season?
Hi, I'd like to just introduce myself. My name's Clara. I'm a student at Hamilton College, and I'm helping to run our beekeeping club. here. We currently have 2 hives and we're looking to set up a 3rd this spring. So I'm sort of spearheading that. I'm very new to all of this. I joined the club last year. So I've, done some work with our pre-existing hives. We harvested some honey last fall, but it's a brand new journey for me. So I'll probably be at a bunch of these meetings and maybe some beginner classes trying to make sure we know what we're doing when we buy a nuke and set up our 3rd hive.
Well, that's great. You're says Hamilton College here. I had to look it up. It says it's in Clinton.
Yeah.
Right. So the Mid-York Beekeeper group is perfect. It's right there. They're in Riscony.
Yeah.
Right around the corner.
Yeah, I think they're having a meeting in a week or 2 that I'll be at, hopefully, to meet some folks local.
I think that's the first Tuesday of the month is out there.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
I think they're doing it every other month, so it won't be until the first Tuesday of April, I believe.
That's unfortunate. Well, I'll be at the April one then, I guess. See what happens.
You'll be at the April 3rd one. I just left my email address. I'm running the meeting for Mid-York, so free1b@gmail.com. We'll hook you up with the flyer and all that stuff. So glad to have you in.
Awesome, thank you.
Also this summer or early spring, we're going to have, we're going to set up hives. And once we can get on the property with a number of people, we're going to show people how to set up different hives and what to look at, what to do, how to test. So that's the kind of stuff you're looking at. It's better to do it shoulder to shoulder with somebody than do it on a YouTube presentation. So be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll keep an eye out for that. It's a little tricky. The school's pretty strict about no one leaving campus this semester because of COVID, but see if I can get special permission, or maybe they'll relax the rules a little bit by April.
Well, we might have to come down and help you out. Who knows?
Maybe.
All right.
Yeah, the hands-on portion is definitely important. As Laryssa mentioned, that you go to these classes, you learn something on a weekend, and then you forget 6 months later when you're in the hive and you need, what did they tell me to do in this situation? But that hands-on stuff, when you're there and you're working with somebody and you're doing it with your own hands and getting instruction over your shoulder, that stuff tends to stick around and last. It's good stuff. I'm doing the same thing here in my area. So there's a few of us that few opportunities around. But again, it's will this COVID thing let up? So hopefully, we'll see.
You'll be old and gray like me by the time it does.
So where's that picture of your hives right there? Looks like you took your plow out to the bees. When was that taken? That was to your long hives there, Dave.
You're gonna have to repeat that. You broke up.
Yeah. It looks like you drove your tractor out to your beehives. Was that a picture taken today or a couple days ago, or?
That was taken a little while ago, but yeah, I keep a path plowed out there. I mean, it's, tractor pushes the snow or the snow blower, so it's easy. That's what I, bought a 4-wheel drive Kubota for,
Yeah. It's on my wish list.
It sure comes in handy.
like I have a question for Laryssa. When you cut your cone, are you just freehand cutting it with a knife, or do you get one of those things that I've seen at Better Bees in Man Lake, like it's a push in, like a cookie cutter type thing?
Oh yeah. You know, I am so cheap. I don't know why I have to do everything the hard way. It took me a few years before I bought one of those cookie cutters. You should definitely buy one of those. They're like $7, and they definitely make things easier. They don't work, you know, like you can't really push into the comb with them more than like a handful of times before they're not sharp enough anymore and they start to squish the comb and doesn't make a sharp cut. But I use it as a guide, and I can use my knife and cut around it and use that as the square shape. Some people say that they use like, you know, without the flavoring or anything added, they use dental floss to cut the comb in nice straight lines too. But I just use a sharp knife and that cookie cutter. Now there are two different shaped cookie cutters. There's that hard case, that is 4¼ inches, and then the clamshell is 4. So I have two different shaped cookie cutters. So if you're buying them online, just make sure you have the right size one. There's two that are very similar in size.
Last summer, I put up a video on YouTube of harvesting honeycomb with a knife, just cutting it out of the frame and transferring, using the clamshell box kind of as a guide to how big it should be, and then I just transferred it with a spatula into the clamshell box.
Yeah, if you're good at eyeballing, it's a lot faster with the cookie cutter, but you can eyeball it with the clamshell. If you have like one, you know, as the template that you can get a little sticky and use that. That's what I did the first few years. And then I was like, hey, I think I'm making enough money off of this that maybe I can spend $7 on a cookie cutter. Actually, even those
I do have one that
what was that?
I do have a it's actually an egg mold for fried eggs that's square. I could probably use that as my template.
Yeah, you don't really need to buy I tried to find one at the store, but I couldn't really find a square cookie cutter that was the right size. But I actually bought, now that I remember it, I bought my plastic boxes. If you're ever looking for the hard cases, I believe the company is called Pioneer Plastics, and it specifically is for comb honey. And they do offer free shipping if you spend at least $100, and that's where I got the 16-ounce ones from. And then I think the 8 ounces I got from Better Bee, but they don't sell as well as the 16-ounce boxes. And for me, at least, they're a lot harder to sell. And then I think one of those websites where you can buy stuff like in bulk from companies in China, they sell those frames with the square boxes in the frames, kind of like the Ross Rounds, but it's the big hard plastic box. And then if you're willing to like shell out more money for a whole bunch of them, it just wasn't something that I wanted to change like all of my hives around for the different frames. But I've also seen them, if like, you know, that's what associations are good for. If a whole bunch of people want to chip in and try it out and buy those, then at least something I didn't understand about the Ross Rounds was that you kind of lose that space if the containers are round. I was always curious why they chose to make them round as opposed to square.
It sounds good.
But yeah, Pioneer Plastic is where I went. And it's food grade plastic.
Yeah, Ross Squares just doesn't have the same ring to it.
Where did you get the frame display for the customer that had the frame of honey in the store?
I don't remember. They ended up buying it on their own. I don't remember where they went for it in the end. There aren't very many people that sell them. And it was like at least $120. It wasn't cheap. Maybe even more like $200. I have seen them for sale on Etsy. I saw one person selling them. It was like they handmade it out of wood, and there was one honey company that made them, and they also sold the frame of Honeycomb as well, and they would make the frame. But sorry, I don't remember off the top of my head where we went for it.
It just looked like it would be great to have it, I'll say a farmer's market. You set up at a farmer's market with a frame of honey out there, and you're selling cut comb. That would be kind of a novel way of displaying your wares. Yeah,
definitely. I've never had the patience for farmers markets, but yeah, it really attracts people's attention. They really love it. That resort, I mean, then I sold each frame of Honeycomb for $120, and they bought one every other week, and it was just something that they became popular. And it's great. You don't have to cut it. You don't have to label it. You don't have to do anything. You just put it in the bag. I put it in a wax nuke box. Would sell them 4 at a time and ship them just 4 frames straight out of the beehive that I would just freeze. And it was the easiest money I made beekeeping, except for the USDA inspection part. That part was a little annoying.
What do you sell a full frame of honey for? Is it medium or deep?
Just a medium. The stand holds a deep frame, but I just sold the medium frames to them.
How much? What's the price going? What's the going rate for a medium frame of honey?
Well, actually, it was a shallow frame, but I sold it for $120 for a frame. I don't know what other people sell it for. There are a lot of people that do comb honey here, and the one lady that sells it at the farmer's market, she doesn't do a lot, so she actually sends people when they go to her at the farmer's market looking to buy wholesale. She sends them to me. So there's not a lot of people that do it in a larger scale. It's more so just like they might have a few cases at their farmer's market stand or something. So I just made up my own price. I had no idea what to sell it for. I don't know what other people sell it for. That's what made it worth my time. And then, I add on the cost of shipping and stuff.
Well, that picture you showed, they paid a lot of money to have that watermelon carved.
I know.
So you probably could have got more for it.
Probably. Yeah, that watermelon was ridiculous. The tricky part, though, for me is that I have to ship it. So we have to mail it. And sometimes the frames do break. And that part is the hard part. It's a lot easier when you can, someone comes and picks it up from your house. Most of the time they don't break, but occasionally they do break. And that's just been the hardest part with shipping them. But yeah, they have quite the budget at that place.
So along with my Ross rounds that I'm going to try this year, the other thing is making actual, because when you sell the full frame, you got to have new wood on it. It can't be old wood, so it's got to be a nice, good frame too. That was one of the other ideas I wanted. I've had a lot of requests for them, but I've never actually taken the time to have the bees draw out a full frame on it of honey on a brand new wood frame for sale. So that's something else. I just figure what a medium is about 60 ounces, 3.5 or so pounds of honey. So Comb honey around here goes for maybe $1.25 to or so an ounce. So that's about $90 at most that we probably get. So you got 120, you said? That's excellent. It's almost $2 an ounce.
Yeah, that's not bad. It's definitely easier than having to get the jars and the labels and all that stuff. And they buy 4 frames at a time. So you're packing them all up at once and shipping it out. But figuring out what we needed to go through to approve it, to ship it out, was quite a pain. No one really seemed to know. I think they just like gave me an answer, because I don't think anyone had ever really asked before what USDA restrictions there might be for shipping out honeycomb. Because once it was in the frame, it was considered beekeeping equipment, which was interesting. So shipping it off island used beekeeping equipment was when things got a little odd for them, and they didn't really know what to say. But yeah, I mean, I don't know how many places would do things like that. Really, like those breakfast buffets is what people seem to like them the most for, and so that they can put it on sale. I've had people just want to buy one for luau's, first birthday luau's here in Hawaii are really popular. I've had people buy them for first birthday parties to put on display at their house, and then just like breakfast and nice brunches and things. It seems to be really popular, or was. That all has really stopped completely, the restaurant sales and stuff.
1-inch cube of honeycomb on a piece of nice fresh toast.
Yeah, it's really the best. Or like a peanut butter sandwich with some honeycomb. It's something I really recommend people try. I mean, most of my family, they tell me, they're like, can I have some honey? And then they're like, not with this stuff in it. Like, I just have regular honey. You know, most people, like my mother-in-law was like, there was stuff floating in my tea when I put that stuff in my honey, in my tea. And a lot of people don't know what to do with it. But I still like to give it to people once in a while, because I think it just reminds people where honey came from, you know, and it's not something that I made in my kitchen. It's something that a lot of work went into it. And some people really love it, and a lot of people just kind of bypass it and don't really think twice about it. But if you never tried it, put some on some brie and stick it in the oven. And it's really delicious.
That's going to be my next one.
Toast some walnuts and then sprinkle walnuts, or like make a chutney and put that on top, or add it to the side. It's really popular at Thanksgiving.
I like it on vanilla ice cream. Can't go wrong there. Really brings out the flavor. So honey and cream, anything. I'll even take, well, this isn't cut comb honey, but just regular honey, about 50% honey and 50% cream, heavy cream, and just give it a good mix. You can pour that on different stuff, put it in coffee or whatever else, tea. It's amazing.
Crystallized honey is good for those things too.
Yeah. Somebody wrote in the comments, my granddaughter likes sandwiches with sliced honey. That must be honeycomb. My kids like honey and peanut butter. You can go on for days about how to eat honey. It's just, can never get enough of it. Good thing, because I've got so much of it.
I still haven't perfected that honey fudge that I was working on at Christmas. But boy, was that addicting.
It was good. It's excellent. I'm glad I got to experience some of that.
That sounds good.
another question in the comments here. Anybody have experience with heather honey? Preparation of colonies, especially. Do we have heather here? I don't know. I'm not. I always thought that whenever I hear heather honey, I always think that's like a European thing, or maybe maybe New Zealand or something.
I've seen it here in Hawaii, not heather honey, but I know beekeepers, and one of my students planted a ton of it at her place for her bees. She said the bees loved it, but I don't exactly know when it was blooming for her.
That's something I'm looking into. Is somebody's going to do somebody who has experience with doing varietal honey. I think that'd be a great thing to learn about, is how specifically to look for and set up for bees to make a varietal honey. I mean, sometimes we got a big flow like the goldenrod, we can get goldenrod honey. But to be something specific in a tight area where you only want that kind, I'd like to learn more about that. That's always been interesting to me. I really enjoy. I know honey is not necessarily the income area for bees, which is what makes bees tough. But to have all the different varieties and the different flavors and the different experiences with each kind of honey is awesome. Which is why I got some of this kiwi honey here. This is great.
Yeah, the farm I worked for did varietal honey, Big Island bees. There might be people to reach out to. They did MacNut, Lehua, and Christmas berry. They moved their beehives. Like, he had a hard time finding property. His dad started the farm in the 70s. He ran one of the biggest pollination services out of Idaho, and then came here to Hawaii and started queen breeding in Kona Queens, and then started the honey farm. And they put their beehives on lava fields right when the lehua starts to bloom, because there's not much that blooms other than the ohia tree with the lehua blossom. And once the next blossom starts, then they have to find, where there's primarily just that one blossom and nothing else. And they go there for that season, and then they harvest the honey and move the bees again for the next season. So they do 3 big harvests, and they're pretty consistent. Like, it's a very consistent flavor year after year from all of the honeys. But I think he has a hard time finding yards where, MacNut's not so hard. You can go to MacNut farms and you have acres and acres of just MacNut trees. And then the lehua, you're fortunate because in the lava fields, there's not much that blooms except for the lehua. But they really depend on the flower fidelity that honeybees practice, and that they'll, fill up on nectar from just one floral source for as long as they can before they move on to the next floral source. And so even though at the MacNut farms, you might have wildflowers and stuff popping up, and there might be wildflowers, like in other areas too. But if there's a huge flow of MacNut flowers and they like the nectar from the MacNut flowers, that's where they're going to go until the MacNut trees dry up. And then you just have to move them before that happens. So they're pretty like this. They're really tied to that schedule. And that part's really important. And then the MacNut's not organic, just the other 2 are, because that's a farm. That's all I know about single source honey. They do a really good job at it. It's possible, but I think you pretty much have to find farmland of just that one flower in order to really do it where you guys are.
Well, what I want to do is I want to share some of the upcoming things here. We have a meeting every 2nd and 4th Mondays of the month. I got to figure out how to share my screen. There we go. So this is CNYBeekeeperschool.com, and here's the Facebook group, and here is the calendar. Just click on the calendar. And today was the Hawaii beekeeping, which is excellent. Thank you. The next meeting is Monday, March 8th, which is on swarm trap building. I'm kind of excited about that one because I can incorporate a lot of what I've learned looking at all the cutouts I do into the ideas behind a swarm trap. And then it'll be how to read a frame, how to find the queen, then queen rearing and splitting for the new beekeeper, making it easy for to increase. And then we have Aaron Lang, who is a beekeeper in Rochester, who has been very successful in keeping his bees alive over the winter. He considers a 10% loss too much over winter, so that should be a good presentation. This one is kind of up in the air, prevent swarming in your apiary. And then we're going to have this one's kind of in the air too. What's happening with your bees now? And then there's a couple other things on the calendar, different stuff coming up that it's going to be quite fun. Some of it's in person. Most of it is right here on Zoom because the in-person things still aren't really happening quite yet. But always open ideas and people who want to get on there and do different, have a platform to talk about what they're interested in. So if anybody here tonight wants to is passionate about a specific area and wants to talk about it, most of this stuff can be rearranged because I make the calendar and I can change it whenever I want. I try to keep it as scheduled. But if something more interesting comes up, all you got to do is sell it to me. And I'll change it. So, couple minutes. Any last thoughts? And then we'll just end this.
I have a friend that's looking for a mead group to make mead. Anybody know anybody does that? I mean, that has a group or a Zoom session?
I know there's a couple on Facebook. I'm not aware of anybody that does any kind of teaching classes about it other than the question and answers. There's definitely mead groups on Facebook, and they're very informative too. I mean, I've seen people ask questions and you get very, very specific answers. So, I mean, it's the way to go there. All right. Well, I'm going to say goodnight, everybody. I'm going to end this meeting. And again, thank you, Laryssa, for taking time
aloha.
out of
You got to say aloha. Aloha.
The middle part of your day, because we're all getting ready for bed here, and you still got a lot of your day left. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Nice to meet you guys.
Thank
Aloha.
you.
And that sunshine coming through the window behind is great.
Getting a tan. It's
All
cold.
right. Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Good night.